here for at least keeping the severe weather threat at bay, especially for the Portland metro area and south along the coastline. But it's the inland areas that have the best chance at seeing some of these thunderstorms actually hold together and roll through. And as they do so, they're going to be stout. These storms are going to be enough to, bring at least the chance for strong winds, if not the chance for some weakening rotation as they roll through, which ultimately would lead to the chance at maybe getting a tornado-warned storm in New Hampshire that ends up moving into Maine. So that's what we're going to be watching as the night goes on here. But again, I talked about this a bit at 5 o'clock. The things that we have working against us, we've got that marine layer locked in place at the coastline. So that's a bit more stable air. It's harder to actually get the storms to fire. That's going to help us out tremendously for right along the coastline. The storms will be weakening as they move in. Not quite as much moisture here, a little bit cooler, and also our dew points are a little bit lower. So these are the factors that are working against keeping those strong storms together. But what we still have to watch for in a lot of these storms is going to be that rotation. Some of the questions that I've been getting are these storms going to move inland and closer to Augusta, Lewiston, etc.? This is mostly going to be focused from about Freiburg and Brownfield south toward Waterboro and Sanford. I think on the other side of 202 is where we'll start to run into some of that marine air, and that's likely where we will see things weaken significantly as they move in. But my focus still is going to be on everything going on in New Hampshire right now. I've got a couple more questions associated with this, just basically what to expect. I think, again, that the big story here is really just that the tornado watch has been expanded to border Maine, but does not include Maine. And this is what we see on the radar right now. I'm going to animate that again so you can pick it out as it rolls on through. Let me bring up a couple more questions here. I accidentally closed out of the Facebook Live, so I lost the comments. Anyways, back to what we were talking about here. So these are the storms that we've got rolling through right now. Again, we've got these little bowing segments, enough rotation that you could end up with an embedded signature for a tornado. If we do see a warning pop, even if you see a severe thunderstorm warning pop, the best thing you can do is go indoors, go inside. And if you see a tornado warning pop, the best thing you can do is get to either an interior section of your house, a stairwell, an interior bathroom with no windows, or if you have a basement, that is the best place you can go. So we've been tracking these storms, and we will continue to do so. Again, we've got these bowing segments through portions of New Hampshire, and this one tornado warning right on the New Hampshire-Massachusetts border. A couple of things that I do like seeing too, we're not seeing quite as much lightning with these storms, which does signify that they may be weakening a bit. And this northernmost echo here on the radar is starting to look a little less impressive too. But of course, we can't let our guard down, especially since we do have the atmosphere primed for at least some rotation in these storms as they move on through. So this is what we're going to be tracking here for the rest of the night. For people who are just hopping back on, I noticed a couple people are having audio issues, but not everybody. Let's see here. Yeah, some people are saying that you have to turn the live stream off and then turn it back on in order to get the sound to work, because I've seen some people say they have sound, some people say they don't. Bangor Brewer, not going to be an issue. This is not going to affect you. There will be some other maybe rumbles of thunder here or there and some heavier rain that moves into Maine, but that's not the main story here. The big story is the tornado watch that has been expanded to include our neighboring counties in New Hampshire. And the reason for that, again, is just due to the fact that we are watching those storms as they roll in. A couple of things we can look at too. If you look toward temperature, notice how along the coastline in Maine, temperatures are not even breaking 50 degrees right now. Whereas in Concord, New Hampshire, we've got 64. South of that, we're starting to mix in upper 60s and even some 70s. So that's something else that works in our favor here. It's just cooler. The air's more stable here. We don't have as much energy for these storms to work with, and that is something that they will need. Now, the concern, of course, is that the dew points are a little bit higher, especially interior from Freiburg to Sanford, where we see those 50, 51 degree dew points. That's maybe just a little bit more energy that we can use for these storms as they move on in. So, you know, weather is complicated, especially when you're forecasting these severe storms that are getting ready to roll on through. So I'm going to stay on the Facebook Live, and the reason for that is because this line of storms is about halfway through the warned area now, and I want to see if the National Weather Service is going to extend that warning into Maine and see where we go from there. A couple of just unique features that you can really pick out very clearly here. Let me grab the illustration tool. These bowing segments, in my color of choice is pink tonight. I actually set up pink for something I was doing with snow, the last snowstorm we had, and I forgot to change the color back to white. So these line segments here, these bowing segments, behind this is where we see those stronger wind gusts, and that's what we're watching for. So I think still that's our biggest concern here in Maine, but the chance is there for some rotation and maybe the chance at, being able to get a tornado warned storm out of this. Again, I still think that the best chance at anything becoming tornado warned is really going to be to our south and to our west, where there's a little bit more rotation in the atmosphere. If we switch it up to the storm winds here, you can see pretty clearly what I'm talking about, in that what we look for when with the rotation, this is a little far from the radar site itself, but we look for red and green right next to each other. So that's one of the signatures that we look for on these storm winds, but we're not seeing a lot of that with this line of storms, which is what indicates to me that the rotation is going to be dropping and not as impressive as these storms start to roll into Maine. So ultimately, I think it's important to watch. Got a couple questions about rainfall totals too. I don't think that we have to worry too much about the rain totals with this, just because it's going to be so quick moving. Chance that, if you get stuck under a downpour, you could see a half-inch of rain, maybe even a little more, but they're so fast moving that the rain isn't really the big story here. I don't think we're going to be talking about flooding, no flash flooding, no localized flooding or anything like that. Just the effects of the wind as these storms roll on through. Give me 1 second. I'm going to switch computers. I'll be right back. Just want to check to see what the National Weather Service is saying. All right, the latest from the National Weather Service, too, is that it looks like the rotation is weakening, which is what we were just talking about. They've dropped that tornado warning into Massachusetts, so now our focus is really just going to be on these lines of storms that start to move into York County, but there's less lightning, they're not quite as organized, which are all good signs to not end up with a rotating storm that becomes tornado warned here in Maine. Still following along with all the comments here. So yeah, this is mostly going to be as these roll through. I mean, there will be some thunder and some lightning, but I'm thinking that we'll keep this weakening trend around, especially as they run into that more stable marine layer. When I came into work, I was amazed at just how thick the fog had gotten. I mean, we were watching the fog slowly build in, but it's thick, and so with that more stable air, it's just you don't have the energy really to get these stronger thunderstorms to fire, which is good. We don't want to see the stronger thunderstorms, but still going to keep an eye on these lines here. If we scroll down a little bit farther south, you'll notice that the thunderstorms themselves are moving through Massachusetts as well. Possible that this line right here ends up moving through Boston, and could be pretty stout as it does so, but the weakening rotation signatures are all good. Again, I think as these storms get closer to the coastline, it's going to be less of an issue, and we won't have to worry quite as much once we actually see them make it into Maine and interact with that cooler, more stable marine air. So that's what I was texting to. I was texting with the team about what to expect as these storms moved on in, and I think that's a pretty good call. It's tough to win against the stable marine air like that, but you know, I feel like this year, the way 2020 has gone, it's just something that you gotta watch. That's actually Keith Carson's joke, so if anyone's watching, you can tell him that I stole his joke for the live stream. Alrighty. So, keeping an eye on, again, this line of storms as it rolls on through. Just looks a little less impressive. Do want to just watch the interaction here between these two little bowing segments. That could allow for just a little bit of extra rotation, and if it does, it could allow for the chance at a warning to get popped maybe closer to Manchester, New Hampshire. But, you know, thanks for everybody who's tuned in, too, and thanks for the good questions. Again, for anybody who is just joining, I see the numbers are fluctuating a bit. This is mostly a southwestern Maine thing. Southern Oxford County from Freiburg, south mostly, and into York County, especially inland areas in York County. That's really what we're watching here. At least that's the best chance for some stronger thunderstorms to move on in. So, just scrolling through some of the comments, seeing what people have to say. Looks like there is still a good bit of lightning closer to Plymouth, New Hampshire. Not seeing quite as much of it on the radar here, but you know, as those storms roll through, they're pretty windy. But like I've been saying all night, I still think that's our biggest threat locally, is going to be damaging wind gusts. And as these storms run into the marine layer, it's just tough to keep them together. They're getting close to the edge of that warning box now. There was a report of some pea-sized hail in Greenville, New Hampshire. Just watching to see how the National Weather Service plays this. There's definitely a bit more rotation to our south and closer to Manchester. So we'll be watching that too. But I'm just keeping an eye on these lines of storms as they move on in, to see what ends up happening here. It's always tough to forecast these setups along the warm front. Warm fronts themselves actually give just a little bit more rotation as storms fire near and along them, and so that's what's helping to keep some of these storms a bit more organized as they move closer to us, despite the fact that there's just not quite as much energy here, and the better chance for the stronger storms was really to our west. But once those stronger storms fire as they move in, you know, they can still pack a punch once they're starting to weaken. But again, I'm generally I like what I see here as far as radar signatures go for weakening storms moving toward Alton and Milton. Starting to see some rain out ahead of this line too. Sanford picking up some rain, and that's going to continue up closer to the 302 corridor, Sebago, Brownfield. Yeah, so we're right on the line of this warning. No updates just yet from the National Weather Service, but I'm watching. There's another Boeing segment here just outside of Manchester too, so starting to see a little bit more lightning with this too, which means it's becoming just a bit more intense, maybe a bit stronger as it moves into Manchester, New Hampshire. I know a lot of this is focused on New Hampshire right now, but what's happening to our west is what ultimately moves in here, and that's why we got to pay attention, especially to see if any of these storms interact in such a way that they can, you know, give one or the other just a little bit extra rotation, because that's really all it takes in a setup like this, is to just get a little bit more twist in the atmosphere, a little bit more wind shear, and then ultimately, you know, you end up with a storm that's rotating and strong enough to actually get warned for a tornado. And that's what's approaching Maine, is those lines. So we got to just watch these to see how it all gets played out here. All right, so it looks like the National Weather Service has chosen not to keep these warned because of those weakening signatures I was talking about. All right, so keep an eye on this for just a second. Go back to the velocity. It's also tough because the Boston radar is down, but let's pause this for a second here. Do you see these? This right here is a signature of rotation. Again, I apologize for the pink marker. I changed the color when I was doing snow stuff for our last snowstorm. That right here, there is the sign of rotation moving toward Manchester. It's broader than what you would expect to see for a tornado-warned system, or tornado-warned storm rather, but definitely showing that the storm is becoming a bit more organized there. And if you look here in the yellow box, the National Weather Service has just expanded the severe thunderstorm warning. So that's what we've got here, is the severe thunderstorm warning. And that's for this line and this cell in particular moving toward Manchester. So that's going to be in effect until about 9 o'clock. So for the next 45 minutes. There's a little bit more lightning on the leading edge of this storm too. That's moving closer and closer to the York County border between New Hampshire and Maine. But overall, it looks like these storms might be weakening a hair as they move closer to us. So, all right, I'm going to wrap the Facebook Live up here. I'm going to keep an eye on this. If anything escalates, we will pop back on, and if we do end up with a tornado-warned storm approaching, we will be live on air. But for now, I'm gonna shut the Facebook Live off. Thanks everybody who joined, and hopefully I don't see you until the 11 o'clock newscast tonight. But if something happens, I will be here and let you know what's up.